kind of working on the side right now on a couple of tips and tricks videos that I plan on having coming out probably within the next maybe week, 2 weeks, something along those lines. Just wait on him to calm down. Okay. So we purchased this thing probably about 2017, 2016, somewhere in there. It's a 2000 Cherokee Sport police edition. We picked up from a police auction for roughly $1,000 or so. The engine was completely blown, and we actually picked up a brand new engine from Chrysler. It cost about roughly $3,000 and got somebody to install that. And we drove it for a couple of years until about roughly 2 to 3 years ago when it was totaled. We actually hit a deer going roughly 70 miles an hour right here in the front. Completely destroyed all of the bodywork on this front driver's side and crushed the entire front driver's side unibody. It destroyed the main frame right here behind the bumper and so on. So we ended up parking it. We killed the tags, killed the insurance, parked it for about a year. It was in and out, a bunch of people. It probably got handed through about 2 to 3 people who had decided, hey, I'm going to go ahead and fix this thing, try and get it back on the road, might drive it myself, and so on. None of those projects ever got finished. So about a year ago, I decided to take it into my own hands. We'll put some pictures up on screen now. This is this entire quarter panel right here. The fender flare is actually the original fender flare. You can see where right here there's a lot of like paint damage, a little bit of like peeling and so on. That's from where when we actually wrecked it, the fender flare kind of, since it's plastic, took a lot of impact, but then popped right back out. It just broke a little bit of paint. However, the fender and the header panel, the headlights, the bumper, all of that, essentially, I just picked up from miscellaneous Jeeps that I could find that would fit over the course of about a month or 2 months. To start things off, I am basically just going to be checking all of our fluids, making sure that everything's in good shape. I know recently the radiator dumped itself. We're not exactly sure why that happened, but I know that they filled it up with water afterwards in order to get it home, and it looks like the reservoir is bone dry. So I'm definitely going to be topping this thing off, and I don't think I'm going to do an entire flush, but I will more than likely be grabbing a pan and just dumping what I have in the radiator already out, and then topping it off from there. I'm not going to empty the entire engine or anything. And as far as our oil goes, oil is moderately dirty. It's a little over the fill line, but it's almost completely black. We will go ahead and check our filter, see how the filter's looking. There we go. All right. Looks like the air filter is fairly dirty. I don't think I should vacuum this out. I probably should just go ahead and get a new one. All right, guys. So just got back from my supply run. I got 3 AutoZone brand things of Antifreeze, the 1 gallons, a new air filter, oil, set of spark plugs, and a 5-gallon bucket so that I can dump the old antifreeze in it. Alright, so we got our oil pan. We got it off the ground a little bit, give ourselves a little bit extra clearance. This is the location of the oil pan, and the drain plug is right here. It's a 15mm socket. It shouldn't be too tight. Just break it loose. go ahead and grab your oil pan. Make sure if you have one like what I have sitting right here, this little top tab, just pop it out so that it has air so it doesn't overflow on the top. It can flow through properly. We'll just go ahead and hand loosen this bolt. And I like, since I have one of these that has like the little drain that catches inside and then you can close it off, I typically just spin the bolt until it pops off of there and just let the bolt fall, and we'll clean it up afterwards. Come back up here to the top and take off the oil fill cap so that there's not air building up. It can just flow straight out and we won't make a mess everywhere. Alright, so while that's finishing up, go ahead and drop back down on the creeper. Just slide under here and see if we can't check the bottom of the radiator for a little drain plug. There should be a drain plug somewhere around here. Yep, that's it. That little tiny black knob poking off of the side of the radiator should be all we need to go ahead and dump all of the old coolant out. And before we do that, go ahead and slide back out and we will grab our 5-gallon bucket. And one more thing to keep in mind before you dump any coolant is make sure that you let your engine completely cool off. You can see my engine is fairly cold right now. I already took a pair of needle nose pliers and loosened our plug, so it should be hand tight now. I should be able to just reach up there and remove it. And you're probably going to want to roll up your sleeves, make sure you're moderate and clear from any splash zone. Alright, I think we managed to catch most of it. I'm going to go ahead and pop this cap so it flows a little bit better. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Close that cap back off and let it go a little slower, because apparently I had it going way too fast and it dumped out all over the place. Alright, so the filter is in kind of a shitty position right now. Grab this light so I can show you. This is the oil pan, which is still kind of dripping a little bit. And the filter is right there, about a whole arm's length away from the oil pan. And if I do a 180 here, you can see that I have this drip bucket directly behind me. So there's not a lot of wiggle room. I'm gonna go ahead and get this filter off. Hopefully it was just hand tightened. Well, I had to stop the camera because apparently it was hand tight, and as soon as I spun it, it shit all over me. I am covered in oil head to toe, and what do you know, it started to die down, the antifreeze that is, and as it died down, it started dripping from a different angle. So we are left with a slightly bigger mess. I'm not as worried about that as I am the oil. The oil filter is kind of just sitting right down in there somewhere. I could not get it past the suspension, so I'm going to have to go up. I'm not sure why they made it like that, but there's no way for me to drop the oil filter down like you normally would. I'm going to have to go from the top down to pick it up and remove it. I'm not going to be filling the oil filter up with oil prior to putting it on because it's completely sideways and I would just be making a big mess and wasting oil. So I'm just going to put it on there and start it dry. Whenever you go to put your new filter on, what you're going to want to do is just grab your old oil, take your new filter, and just dabble your finger around a little bit in there. Try and get a nice wet spot. Get just a little bit of oil on your finger, and you're going to want to run it around this whole O-ring right here. This basically just ensures that you get a good seal and you don't end up leaking oil all over the place. And then normally what you would do is, in most cases, you would take some oil and pour it right into this hole right here. That way, when you go to start your car with the new oil in it, you're not starting off dry. And basically what that means is it's going to pull the oil from here immediately instead of having to wait until this gets filled up. And it'll make a slight noise if you do what I'm doing right now when you first go to start it. I am not going to be filling this up because if you can see right down there is where I'm having to put this filter on. So it's going to have to go on completely sideways, and I just don't feel like having to or attempting to fill this thing up and spill oil all over the place. But now make sure that when you get ready to start pouring your oil in, for one, make damn sure that you remembered to put your drain plug back in. I can't stress that enough. I know it sounds silly, but there was one instance in which I forgot to put my drain plug back in. I wasn't paying attention. I started pouring the oil directly into the top. Everything was fine. And then next thing I know, I look down and I'm standing in about 1.5 gallons of motor oil all over the floor. I waited until I was almost completely done pouring it before I noticed. And I'm actually going to come back over here to the front. Don't start pouring it like this. If you start pouring it like this, you're going to make a big mess because the air is going to constantly try to cycle through. You're going to have bubbles and it's going to start pouring all over the place. So what you want to do is start pouring it from the side like this. You'll actually be able to get it lower this way too. Just try and line it up as best you can, just like that. And start nice and slow until you get a nice pocket of air in there. And then you can start getting a little bit of a faster stream. I spoke a little bit. You're better off having less on your initial pour than too much because you can't necessarily take any out and you don't want to overfill it, but you can always add some. So what I like to do is, even if they say that it calls for 5, keep in mind it's not filling the filter yet. So the filter is going to take a little bit of a chunk of that away. So it could say full right now. You want to wait about 2 minutes, let it all settle, and then start it. Let it run for a second and fill the oil filter up, and then you're going to turn it back off and let it sit for another minute. And then you're going to recheck it and top it off from there so that once the oil filter is filled, then you'll have an actual estimate of how much you need to add. But I'm going to go ahead and start pouring some antifreeze in here while that oil settles. And then what I'd like to do is every time, because I don't have a way of measuring that right now, every time I empty one of these bottles, I would like to fill it back up with the old antifreeze. And I was right, it does look pretty clean. I don't see really any metal shavings in it or anything like that. If you don't know, when you go to check your antifreeze and you see metal shavings in it, typically that means that you have a water pump issue. When your water pump goes bad, it'll typically leave metal shavings. It'll start grinding off and leave metal shavings in the antifreeze itself. So I like to check for that periodically whenever I'm checking the antifreeze levels and whenever I go to do a system flush like this. So for the most part, everything is put back together. I went ahead and I checked the oil since it's been sitting, and the dipstick was reading about roughly a quart low, which is what I had left in the 5-quart bucket. So I just went ahead and filled that back up, put the cap on. So we got our oil, should be almost done. I will have to top it off once the oil filter takes in what it needs to take in. And I'm probably going to let it run for just a second, long enough for it to start pulling some of this antifreeze in before we bleed the system. And then we will start working on the spark plugs from there. Go ahead and start it. So we're gonna go ahead and start on the spark plugs, and unfortunately, I think it's like 97 to 2001 Cherokees have these coil packs. So we're gonna have to take off this entire rail right here. Might have to move a couple of these hoses, get them out of the way so that we can gain access to a couple of them. I think there's like 6 10mm bolts that we gotta take off to get this rail off, revealing the spark plugs. So shouldn't be too bad. Alright, so I got one out. You can kind of see it's pretty charred. This thing is not in great condition. It smells pretty bad as well. Try and give you guys a little bit better of an idea of what I just did here. So we removed this coil pack rail. You can see this coil pack rail. So normally it'd be turned that way and pushed in. We took this off, and there's really no way to get this taken out without disconnecting this harness and removing these lines, which I don't want to do. So basically what we've done is we've pulled it out and we have turned it so that it's sitting at a slight angle. It's about 90 degrees different from what it was before, which reveals just enough space for us to get these spark plugs out. Now there are 2 behind this AC compressor, and there's 2 back here in this corner. These 4 right here shouldn't be too bad, but it looks like these 2 are probably going to be a bit of a pain. And get a little bit of a better look at what the spark plug looks like. It's pretty burnt up. It's not looking too good. Honestly, has a bit of a rusty look to it, so they definitely needed changing. And we're basically just going to continue this process all the way across, replacing each one and checking the gap on our new spark plugs as we are putting them back in there. Because even though they claim to be pre-gapped, that's not always the case, unfortunately. More often than not, they are not properly gapped. So I'm going to go check the owner's manual, see what the gap is supposed to be set to, and we will pre-gap all of our new spark plugs and then insert them and get this coil pack rail back on. So I got all of my spark plugs out, but I have 2 left to put in, and before we throw these in, I kind of just want to quickly show you guys how to gap a spark plug in case you've never done this before. As I mentioned previously, they do claim typically to be pre-gapped. However, 90% of the time they're not. So what you want to do is you want to refer to the owner's manual and see what gap the owner's manual says that your engine requires. For instance, the 4.0 liter 2000 Jeep Jeep Cherokee takes a I think it's a 0.035. So for this one specifically, we're actually 2 over, 0.02 over. And then I think the 4.7 liter requires a 4 or a 4.5. It's one of the 2. Typically what I do is these are always sitting at 0.0. So I basically just look at the number in the center. So this one is 3.5. What you do is you take your little conductor right here, and you have this disc that gets bigger as you go along, and you just slide it right there at the beginning and you spin it, and as you're spinning it, you're watching these numbers so that you can line it up to where it wants to be. All right, so we'll let that run for just a minute. Sounds perfectly fine. Started up a lot better than actually what it normally does. It typically has a little bit of hesitation when you go to try and turn the key and start it. There's typically a little bit of hesitation going on, and that time it seemed to crank right up, especially when you let it sit for a little bit. So who knows, maybe that won't happen nearly as often now.